All right, we are live. We are going to break down the lawsuit involving Nerlens Noel, a center in the NBA, against Rich Paul, who's LeBron James's friend and agent, and their agency called Clutch Sports. And so Nerlens Noel is suing Rich Paul for $58 million because he says that essentially Rich Paul didn't do his job. And so I have the lawsuit. I've reviewed the lawsuit, and I'm going to break down this lawsuit. And so let's get started with the lawsuit. So the lawsuit was filed in Texas, and I actually think that for reasons I'm going to get into later on, I don't believe that the lawsuit is going to continue in Texas, and I'm unsure that Texas is the right venue. But I'm not going to get into all that legalese, but let's get into the facts, because the facts are important. And as I like to say, anyone could sue someone, but just the ability to file a lawsuit doesn't mean that you have a case or a winning case. And so let's go through Nerlens Noel's claims against Rich Paul. So the complaint goes through his background. He played at Kentucky a year. He was drafted in the NBA. I believe he sat out his first year. And then he was kind of a role player. He was a defensive type center. And from my perspective, he's sort of underachieved in the NBA. He was a player that when he declared for Kentucky, I remember ESPN broke into their regularly scheduled program to announce his college decision. He might have been the number 1 or number 2 player coming out of high school. And then a year later, he got drafted. And he got drafted number 4, even though he had hurt his knee in college at Kentucky. And so the situation arises. What happens in the NBA is that at the conclusion of your rookie contract, if the team extends the option, you will become a restricted free agent. And a restricted free agent means that you can sign with any team you want, but the team that has your rights has the ability to match any contract that is offered to you. And so Nerlens Noel was, I think, coming up after his 4th season under contract, and he had entered restricted free agency. Now, typically, most players re-up with their team at this time period. So it's rare to see a player take what's called the qualifying offer, which means that if you don't want to re-up with your team or another team didn't offer you a contract, the team that you are currently with can offer you a qualifying offer, and that salary is going to be very similar to your initial contract. And I believe Nerlens Noel's initial contract, his first 4 years, paid him approximately $16 million, 14 to 16 million. I can't recall off the top of my head, but we're going to get into that in a bit. And so after the start of free agency, Dallas offered his then agent, who was not Rich Paul, his then agent was Happy Walters. They offered Nerlens Noel 4 years and $70 million, which is about $17 million per season. And this is important to note because in 1 year, he was going to make more money than he did in his first 4 years. So this, even from my perspective, his initial contract is fabulous money. And quite frankly, if I had that much money, I would retire. But this new contract was substantially more than he had already made in 4 years in the NBA. Now, they were offering 4 years, $70 million, but the max that they could have, his max by max salary is in the NBA, the salaries are capped. And so there's a max amount that each player can be paid, and that's based upon years experience and what team. I don't want to get into the salary cap, and I'm not like an expert in the salary cap, but my knowledge is more better than most sports fans. But long story short is that there's a maximum salary that he could have been offered by his current team, which at the time was the Dallas Mavericks. That max salary was 5 years, $146 million. So even though he was offered 4 years, 70, the max that they could have given him was 5 years, 146. Now, other teams in the NBA wouldn't be able to offer him a 5-year contract. Only the Mavericks would be able to offer him a 5-year contract. And the other teams would be able to offer 4 years, 109. That would have been the other team's max. So what his ideal would have been to get more than $100 million. But based upon this complaint, it appears the only offer he received was 4 years, $70 million from the Mavs. And that was negotiated by his contract or his agent at the time, Happy Walters. Now, they were sitting on that offer, it appears, and he was in LA at the time, and he connected with Ben Simmons, who's repped by Rich Paul. He went to Ben Simmons' birthday party, the complaint alleges, and at that birthday party, Rich Paul told him that he should be a $100 million man. And so Noel alleges that, let me get to what exactly what was said, that he alleges that Paul told him that he can get him a $100 million deal. And so Paul advised him to hire him. He terminated the contract with his prior agent, and he signed with Paul. Now, this is where it gets a little fuzzy. And the backstory of it is this, is that when an agent negotiates a contract, even if he's fired, if the client signs that contract, the agent would receive his commission. So in this case, Happy Walters would have received his 4% if Noel, under the advice of Rich Paul, signed that contract offer for 4 years, $70 million. So it's in Rich Paul's best interest that he negotiate the contract so that he's able to earn the commission and that it doesn't go to Happy Walters. So in my opinion, Noel should have used his third eye game and seen the play that Rich Paul may have been making, which was that, look, if you're signing with Rich Paul, the only way that Rich Paul can get paid is if he can get you a contract from someone else, and not take that 4 year, $70 million. But Rich Paul advised him not to take it. He took Rich Paul's advice. Now, Noel ultimately tried to bet on himself, and we're going to later find out that his bet failed. But, the agent works for him. The agent, similarly to a lawyer, can only advise you. And I see this all the time where people are calling for second opinions. And sometimes people are gassed up when they receive a second opinion. So if someone calls my office wanting a second opinion on a personal injury case or habitability case, typically I'm going to explain the process, and I'm going to explain that essentially I would share in the fee. But the longer that I have the case, the more fees that I'll get, because I can say I did more work. Now, in the agent community, the work is done up front. So Rich Paul wouldn't have received anything. And so you got to make the best decision for you. And Nerlens Noel needed to make the best decision for him. And he decided that he wanted to roll the dice. And now essentially he's blaming Rich Paul because it didn't work out. Now, if he really believed that Rich Paul was going to give him $100 million, he should have required Rich Paul to put it in the contract. If Rich Paul was promising him a $100 million contract, it should have been in his contract with Rich Paul. But the reality is that Rich Paul was telling him what he could get, what he thought he would be able to get, what he thought if everything was going to go right, his worth would be on the open market. But again, he entered a contract with Rich Paul, and I always say, if you have a contract with someone, all the terms need to be in the contract. So if the terms of the arrangement was that Rich Paul was going to get him a $100 million contract, it should have been in the contract, his contract with Rich Paul. Now, the reality was that the next season, Nerlens Noel underperformed. He was taken out of the rotation, which means that he wasn't playing much. Then he decided to get elective surgery on his thumb, and he was also suspended in the same year. He was also suspended for a drug violation. So the following summer, when he became a free agent, there wasn't a whole lot of offers. I believe that season he was averaging like 12 to 15 minutes per game, and his career was derailed. So they mentioned the torn ligament in his thumb, and that he was forced to miss 42 games. And some of these lawsuits, when you write the lawsuits, you have to present the lawsuit in the light most favorable to your client. So Noel's attorney is doing his job, but what Noel's attorney didn't mention was, even though he was considered a rising star in the league, he wasn't even playing for his own team by December 2017. And one of the reasons why he decided to get surgery was he had a couple games in a row where he did not play, and I think 2 games in a row where he did not play, and 1 game before that where he played 6 minutes. So basically he was a bench player at this point, and he was outside of the rotation. So the following season, they're saying that no one from Clutch Sports presented him with any offers. Well, that's not on Clutch Sports, in my opinion. He played 12. He only played in half the games. He missed half the games. He got suspended for drugs. He had surgery. And when he did play, he was only playing 10 to 12 minutes per game. That's not a $100 million salary. You know what I mean? And so I think that was ridiculous. This is kind of like ridiculous to expect that you are going to be in high demand after you had an underwhelming season at best. What else did I highlight? All right, so the next year he signed a 1+1, which means with the OKC Thunder, that means that he signed a 2-year contract, but he had an option to terminate the contract after the first year, and he signed for the league minimum. So instead of making $17 million a year, Noel was making $3.75 million a year. That's crazy, but that's life. You bet on yourself. Sometimes you lose. And so basically this season, he only played 13 minutes a game. Now they can spin it as best as they can. They called him a fan favorite, that he was playing a critical role, but his role was not that critical if he was only playing 13 minutes a game. And so after that season, he wasn't getting a lot of contract offers either. And so here's where the fuzzy here's where it gets fuzzy. Let me get to the best part of the lawsuit, in my opinion, is that he alleges that teams are reaching out to Rich Paul, and that Rich Paul was not relaying the offers to him. Rich Paul, as an agent, has what's called a fiduciary duty to his client. And long story short, that means he's got a duty of loyalty. So if someone's making an offer, Rich Paul needs to relay that offer to his client so that his client can either accept or decline or make a counteroffer. And Noel is alleging that his former coach, Brett Brown, indicated that the 76ers were reaching out to Rich Paul and Rich Paul wasn't getting back to them. Now, if that's true, that would be documented, either phone records, text messages, emails, And that'd be very interesting if that's true, because if the 76ers are making Noel a legitimate offer and his agent didn't relay that back to him, that would be problematic in my opinion. And that would expose Rich Paul to some liability. But the proof will be in the pudding. It appears that Noel's team doesn't currently have any objective evidence besides the hearsay statements made by Brett Brown. And hearsay means any statement made out of court for the truth of the matter. So this is a hearsay statement. This wouldn't come in to trial unless his attorney is able to find an exception to allow it to come in, or if they had any document or any objective evidence, they can get it into trial that way. So long story short, Noel never really lived up to his expectations that were had of him when he was drafted, and he's essentially a journeyman. After playing at OKC, he signed a contract with the Knicks for 1 year, and he fired Rich Paul, I think, after the 2020 season. And in addition to the 76ers, he's also alleging that the Rockets and Clippers were trying to get in contact with Rich Paul, but Rich Paul wasn't taking or returning those phone calls. Again, that'll be documented. And so I would be interested to see that. And if that's true, and that they are reaching out, providing offers, that would expose Rich Paul to some liability. But that statement's vague. It could be, the teams could have been reaching out to Rich Paul just to kind of reach out and discuss potentially signing Noel, but not extending an actual offer. And that's where you would get into the gray area as to whether or not he had breached his fiduciary duty. But he eventually signed three at the end of this past season, 2021. He signed a 3-year deal with the Knicks for $32 million. And so, he had a good season last year. He was playing 24 minutes a game. And keep in mind, in the seasons immediately after he turned down that contract, he was playing only 12 minutes a game, and now he's playing double. And he has a real role for a playoff team, and they re-signed him to basically $10 million. To be a big man in today's NBA, he is making $10 million. I saw that Clint Capella, for those of you that are NBA fans, signed for 2 years, $46 million. I wish we all could be 6'10 or 6'11 and run and jump, but we can't. And so this is why I think this lawsuit's not going to continue. In the standard agreement between an agent and the player, it requires the parties to go through an arbitration. And so I believe Rich Paul's attorneys will file a motion to get this action removed from the federal courts in Texas to an arbitration in which the matter will be like private in essence. And an arbitration is that it's handled by either a retired judge or a very experienced attorney. And then that arbitrator will be essentially the judge and jury and decide what happens with the case. They'll decide the facts and the law. And the hearing will be similar to a trial, but it'll be in an informal setting, usually a conference room. And they will issue their decision, and that'll be that. So I don't expect this case to go forward because of this arbitration agreement, but let's get through the rest of the cause of action. The breach of fiduciary duty, which we discussed earlier, this defines the fiduciary duty. The breach of contract, which is the offshoot of the breach of fiduciary duty. There's a breach of duty of good faith and fair dealing. Again, this goes back to Noel's allegation that Rich Paul wasn't relaying offers and he wasn't making his best effort to obtain offers. And And so that's that. And so let me stop sharing. Let me see if I have any comments. I don't have any comments. There's no viewers today. So, but I think that this is a case where Nerlens Noel bet on himself and he came up short ultimately. If he played as well as was expected, he would have received a similar contract. And that's what happens if you bet on yourself. Now, there are guys in the NBA that turned down such deals. They played well and they ended up getting the max. And so I don't believe that the only way I believe that Rich Paul has any liability here is if Nerlens Noel is able to prove that teams were making offers to him and that Rich Paul wasn't relaying those offers back to him. And so in order for him to prove that, they'll have to take positions of the front office of the 76ers or the Clippers or what was the other team? I can't think of the other team, but that's what they would need to do to prove. I just don't necessarily see it happening because I believe a lot of these conversations and offers are happening informally. But those are my thoughts. And what we get to what we all learn is a lot of times when you're hiring professionals, is you always have to keep in mind their interests in the matter. And so the Wild should have known that Rich Paul was only going to receive his commission if he rejected that 4-year, $70 million contract. And to reject a 4-year, $70 million contract, you really needed to be sure that you were willing to take that risk. And for the rest of us, when we're hiring professionals, let's say you're hiring a lawyer and you have a personal injury case, and you're talking to another attorney, and the other attorney is making real promises and they think that they could deliver on the promise, then that needs to be in the retainer agreement, right? So if you have a case and you talk to an attorney and that attorney says that, hey, your case is 6 figures and the current offer is only $70,000, if that current attorney really believes he can get you 6 figures, then it needs to be in that agreement, or else you should not rely on his statement that your case is worth 6 figures, that you're actually going to get 6 figures, right? And so just keep in mind, because once Rich Paul, it was a win-win situation. He got a new client, and that if he was able to land that deal, great, he was going to get 4% of that deal. But if he wasn't able to land the deal, he's still going to be getting paid more than if, like he got 2%, 2 or 4% of the $3 million. That's more money than he would have got if Noel signed the 4-year, $70 million extension, because that was negotiated by his prior agent. And Rich Paul would have been representing Noel for 4 years until he'd be able to earn any commission from Noel as it pertains to his player contract. It looks like my internet's really bad, and so I'm gonna cut it short. But what are your general thoughts? I know in retrospect we know that Noel made a mistake, but if you were in Noel's position, would you ever roll the? All right, I'm back. I think that is a sign that I need to go home and that I need to end this live stream. The internet is being really shaky. I appreciate you to get this far. Let me know if you would if you would have rolled the dice like Noel did, or if you would have re-signed the 4-year, $70 million contract. And let me know if you think that Rich Paul has any liability as a result of the alleged conduct. Thank you so much. Salute to you if you got to this far. I appreciate it. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. Thank you.